I've worked homicide for 15 years. I've seen every kind of murder, spiteful, careless, premeditated, impulsive. But this one was impossible. The call came in at 4:27 a.m. Motel manager found a dead guest in room 209. Door bolted from the inside. No forced entry, no windows open, no way in, no way out. I pulled up to the scene just as forensics was wrapping up their first pass. The room smelled wrong. Not just the blood, not just death. Something else. Something sour. Like the air had been stagnant for too long. The victim was on the bed, half covered by the sheets, eyes wide open, deep slashes across the throat and chest. Brutal, messy. Whoever did this took their time. I checked the locks first. The deadbolt was still engaged. Chain lock, still latched. Only one way in or out, and it had been locked from the inside. I turned to the motel manager, a jittery old man who kept wringing his hands. "Who found him?" I asked. "Housekeeping," he stammered. "Came by to check why he hadn't left yet." No answer. They called me and, I had to use the master key to unlock the main lock, but the bolt and chain were still on. We had to break the door in. I glanced at the door frame. Slight damage, but only from being forced open. "And no one left the room after?" The manager shook his head. "Not unless they walked through walls." I stepped back inside. Nothing about the room made sense. Nothing stolen, nothing knocked over, no signs of a struggle. Just the body, and one other thing. A disposable camera. It sat on the bedside table, next to a half-empty bottle of whiskey. I picked it up. Lightweight, cheap, pulled the film lever. Only one exposure left inside. Someone had taken pictures. I handed it off to forensics. "Get this developed immediately." The tech gave me a weird look, but nodded. Then I noticed something else. The mirror across from the bed. It was smudged, like someone had been standing there for a long time, breathing against the glass. Forensics called me back an hour later. "Detective, you need to see this." They handed me the printed photo, and my stomach dropped. The victim was in bed, still alive, sleeping, and standing over him. Someone else. The figure was tall, thin, face indistinct, blurred like a long exposure. But they were there, standing inches from the bed, watching, waiting. And the worst part? The timestamp, 3:47 a.m., minutes before the victim died. "Jesus Christ," one of the techs whispered. I gripped the photo, my hands cold. "No one left that room," I muttered. The tech nodded. "Then who took the picture?" The sun was just starting to set when I saw it. I had been running the same trail for months, a quiet stretch through the woods, just outside of town. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to find something wrong. But that evening, as I rounded a bend near the creek, I noticed something off about the ground ahead. The earth was uneven, disturbed, like something had been buried there. And then I saw the arm. At first, my brain refused to process what I was looking at. A human hand stuck out from the dirt, pale, limp. The fingers were curled slightly, the fingernails packed with soil. It looked wrong, not the way a hand should look. I froze mid-stride, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't some Halloween prop left behind. This was real. Someone had been buried here, and not long ago. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking. 911. The operator's voice was calm, professional. "You said you found what?" "A grave. Someone's buried here. I can see their hand. Oh, Jesus. I think it's a woman's hand." The dispatcher kept me on the line, told me to stay put. Within minutes, I heard sirens in the distance, then the crackling of radios. The cops arrived first, then the paramedics. Then, finally, the dig team. That's when things got even worse. The officers roped off the area. One of them, a grizzled-looking guy with a tired face, squatted beside the grave and studied it. "It's shallow," he muttered. "Not even 2 feet deep." He reached down and gently touched the exposed wrist. Then he recoiled. Still warm. I felt sick. They worked fast after that. Shovels dug into the earth, dirt flying as they uncovered the body. And that's when the real horror started. The body was intact. Arms, torso, legs. But as they dug deeper, one thing was missing. The head. It wasn't just removed. It was nowhere to be found. One of the paramedics swore under his breath. A younger cop stepped back, looking pale. "Where the hell is the head?" someone asked. But there was something even worse than that. Something I didn't see at first. The dirt inside the grave. It was packed from the inside. I saw one of the officers notice it too. The way the dirt clung to the corpse's fingernails. The bruises on the forearms, like the body had been thrashing before it died. And then the quiet realization that settled over all of us. This person wasn't put in the grave. They had buried themselves. I backed away, nausea curling in my stomach. The cops were talking in low, urgent voices, but I couldn't focus. All I could do was stare at that body, at the dark soil jammed beneath its nails, at the space where the head should have been. What kind of hell would make someone dig their own grave? What could have made them do it? And worst of all, where was the head? That night, I barely slept. I kept checking the news, refreshing over and over. Nothing. By morning, I drove past the crime scene. The area was still taped off, a few officers standing watch. But the grave? It was filled in, like nothing had ever been there. 2 days later, I got a call. It was one of the officers from the scene. He sounded off. "You were the one who found it, right?" "Yeah," I said, stomach twisting. There was a pause. "Listen," he said, "we've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" His next words stopped my heart. "We don't know who the victim is." "What?" I thought. "No records, no missing persons." And the DNA came back. He hesitated. "Came back? What?" "No match. Like they don't exist." I swallowed hard. "And the head?" More silence. Then, "We found it." That should have been a relief, but something in his voice made my skin crawl. "Where?" I asked. The officer cleared his throat. "That's not the problem." "Then what is?" Another long pause. Then, "The problem is, we found the head 3 days ago, before you even found the grave." I hung up the phone. I haven't been back to that trail since, but some nights I dream about it. I was about 6 miles into the hike when I noticed the footprints. At first, I wasn't paying much attention. The trail was narrow, winding through thick pine trees, and I was focused on getting to the next ridge before dark. But something about the prints caught my eye. There were 2 sets, one larger, adult-sized, and one much smaller, a child. I stopped, glancing around. No sign of anyone ahead. I hadn't passed another hiker in hours. I crouched down, studying the prints. The smaller set was leading in. The adult prints, leading out. A cold feeling settled in my chest. I scanned the woods, but the trees were too dense to see far. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe a kid had turned back early, and an adult had kept going. That's what I told myself, until I walked another half mile, and the smaller footprints vanished. I stopped dead. 1 second, the child's prints were there, right alongside the adults. The next, they were just gone. Not faded, not covered, just gone, like the child had simply disappeared into thin air. But the adult's prints, they kept going, steady, unbroken, like nothing had happened. I turned in a slow circle, listening. The woods were silent, too silent. No birds, no wind in the trees. Just me, standing there trying to make sense of something impossible. And then, a branch snapped. It came from behind me, not ahead, not on the trail, somewhere deep in the trees. I swallowed hard. Someone was watching me. I turned toward the sound. Nothing, just dark trees stretching into the distance. But that feeling was there, the weight of unseen eyes. I had 2 choices: follow the trail, see where it led, or turn back now. I hesitated, staring at the adult footprints, at whatever had been walking alongside that child. I took one step forward, and that's when I heard it. A child's voice, faint, far away. "Help me." I froze. The sound came from deep in the woods, far off trail, too far. "Help me." The same tone, the same distance, exactly the same as before, like a recording played on loop. I took a step back. Suddenly the hairs on my arms stood on end. I wasn't alone. I turned, heart pounding, and that's when I saw it. A figure, standing just inside the tree line, too far to see clearly, not moving, just watching. I didn't hesitate. I turned around and walked fast. Not running, not yet. Just putting distance between me and whatever was in those woods. The footprints stretched ahead of me, leading out. I followed them, never looking back, never stopping, until I reached my car. I never reported what I saw. Because what could I say? That a kid's footprints just vanished? That something was lurking in the woods mimicking a child's voice? No one would believe me. But I know what I saw. And I know one thing for sure. There was never a second hiker. There was never a child. There was only one set of footprints, leading in, and whatever walked out wasn't human. Dr. Michael Halloway had been a coroner for over 20 years. He had seen things most people couldn't stomach. Burn victims, dismemberments, bodies that had been left to rot in the heat of summer. Nothing surprised him anymore. At least, that's what he thought. Until Jane Doe number 4216. It was late, past midnight, when he started the autopsy. He had done dozens of these before, working alone in the cold, fluorescent glow of the morgue. The silence was familiar, comforting. He adjusted the overhead light, glancing over the case file. Female, mid-30s, found in a river, no ID. He sighed, pressing record on the audio log. Autopsy report for Jane Doe number 4216. Subject appears to be Michael. He froze. The voice had come from inside the room. Software, close, like someone was standing just behind him. He turned, scanning the empty room. Nothing. Just cold steel tables and bodies covered in white sheets. The only sound was the distant hum of the refrigeration units. For a long moment, he stood there, heart pounding. Then he shook his head. Lack of sleep. Stress. He took a deep breath, adjusted his gloves, and picked up the scalpel. Then his phone rang. The sound made him jump. The morgue had no reception. It was underground, deep beneath the hospital. His phone shouldn't be ringing, but there it was. A call from an unknown number. Frowning, he pulled off a glove and answered. "Hello?" Silence. Then a whisper. "Don't do it." The line went dead. A chill ran down his spine. He glanced at Jane Doe number 4216. Her body lay still, pale, lifeless. But suddenly, she didn't feel like just a body anymore. He swallowed hard, glancing at the security camera in the corner, just to reassure himself. But when he looked at the screen, the camera feed was frozen. A single glitched frame. Him. Standing over the body, and something behind him. A blurred shape leaning close, mouth open as if whispering. His stomach lurched. He turned fast, scanning the room again. Still empty, still silent. But suddenly, the room felt wrong. Like he wasn't supposed to be there. Like something was watching him, waiting. He pulled his gloves off, voice shaking as he reached for his recorder. Autopsy report. He hesitated. Autopsy report. Postponed. He didn't log the reason. He didn't need to. He just backed away, turned off the lights, and left the morgue without looking back. The next morning, he filed for a transfer, moved to administration, away from the bodies, away from Jane Doe number 4216. But every now and then, when he stays too late at the hospital, he swears he hears it again. A whisper coming from the morgue. calling his name. We weren't supposed to be out that far. The park rangers had warned us, stick to the marked trails, avoid going too deep. But we were overconfident, the way people always are before something bad happens. And that's how we found the body. At first, it didn't register. It was face down in the dirt, motionless. I thought it was a mannequin, some sick joke left behind by another hiker. But then I saw the hands. Pale, stiff, real. A dead man. We didn't touch him, just stood there staring. Something felt off. There was no blood, no gunshot wounds, no bruising, and even stranger, no drag marks. Like someone had just placed him there. We called the police immediately. They arrived fast, a team of officers and a forensic crew. They were quiet as they assessed the body, their brows furrowing in confusion. Finally, one of them, a senior detective with a face like stone, spoke. "This isn't a crime scene." "What do you mean?" I asked. He gestured at the lack of evidence. "There's no sign of struggle, no footprints, except yours. No blood, no cause of death." One of the forensics guys shook his head. "It's like someone dressed up a corpse and set it here just for us to find." They checked the body for ID, wallet, phone, everything intact. Name, Jeremy Holt. A missing persons case from 2 years ago. But here's the problem. His body was perfectly preserved, no decay, no signs of exposure, like he had died yesterday. I felt sick. This wasn't just some lost hiker. Something was wrong with him. That's when another cop approached the detective, whispering something I couldn't hear. His face went rigid. He turned back to us. "You need to leave. Now." They wouldn't tell us what was going on. But later, I heard from a friend on the force. They had taken Jeremy Holt's fingerprints, and they had matched, but not to 2-year-old records. They matched fresh ones, from a rental car booked under his name, this morning. The last tenants had vanished without a word. That wasn't entirely unusual. Some renters fall behind on payments and just disappear, ditching their deposit to avoid confrontation. But the house itself? That was the part that didn't make sense. It was perfectly clean. No furniture, no garbage left behind. Not a single personal item, just empty rooms and silence. I had owned the house for years, renting it to different tenants every few months. It was a modest place, 2 bedrooms, a basement, nothing fancy, but it always rented fast. This time had been no different. A young couple had moved in 6 months ago. No complaints, no issues. Rent was always paid on time. Then suddenly, nothing. Their payments stopped. Their numbers were disconnected. By law, I had to wait before reclaiming the property, but when I finally arrived, there was nothing left, not even a scrap of paper. It was as if they had never lived there at all. I checked the kitchen. The fridge was empty. The cabinets were bare. I ran my fingers along the counters. Not a speck of dust. Upstairs, the bedrooms were the same. Clean. Sterile. Even the carpets looked freshly vacuumed. I've seen tenants abandon homes before, but usually they leave something behind. A forgotten toothbrush, an old sock under the bed. This question mark. This felt intentional, like someone had wiped the place down to erase all traces of life. Then I went into the basement. At first it seemed normal. Concrete floors, a workbench, some old shelves. Then I saw the stain, a dark, reddish-brown patch soaked deep into the floor. My stomach turned. It was too much blood for something small, too much for an accident. I crouched down, pressing my fingers to the concrete. Dry, old, but the house had been immaculate. Why would they scrub everything else? And leave this? I called the police. A forensic team arrived, setting up lights and marking the stain. One of the officers, an older guy who had seen too much, stood beside me, arms crossed. "There's something off about this," he muttered. "You think?" I gestured around. "Who cleans an entire house spotless and leaves a basement like this?" He didn't answer, because at that moment, one of the forensic guys called out, "Hey, we've got a problem." They had found a drain in the middle of the room, but when they pried it open, it didn't go anywhere. No pipe, No connection to the plumbing. Just a hollow cavity. Too small for a body. Too deep to make sense. Just a dark, empty hole. The officer frowned. That's not standard. Another tech spoke up. There's no record of this in the blueprints. My skin prickled. You're telling me someone installed a fake drain? They didn't answer right away. Then the first tech swallowed hard. More like a disposal site. I didn't ask for what. The police dug into the house's history. The previous tenants? They didn't exist. Fake names. Fake references. Nothing about them checked out. It was like they had moved in, erased themselves, and disappeared. And I still don't know what was in that drain. The cops never told me. Just filled it with concrete and told me to sell the house. I did. And I never went back. It was the kind of case that should have been straightforward. A missing woman, a concerned friend, a simple address check. But from the moment I stepped onto that property, I knew something was wrong. And by the time I left, I had more questions than answers. Her name was Cara Delaney. Mid-30s, quiet life, never missed work. So when she suddenly stopped showing up, her best friend, Lisa, hired me to look into it. I was a private investigator, mostly handling cheating spouses and fraud cases. Missing persons? Not my usual gig, but Lisa was desperate. She wouldn't just leave, she told me. Something's wrong. I agreed to check her last known address, and that's where things got weird. The house was a Victorian-style wreck. Boarded windows, a sagging roof, overgrown weeds, no sign that anyone had lived there in years. I double-checked the address. Exact match. Maybe she had moved out long ago? That's what I thought, until I saw the crime scene tape. It was old, weathered, torn in places, and inside the air was wrong. Dusty but stale, like something had been left to rot. The living room was covered in old stains, dark splatters across the walls, the floor, blood, dried and faded, but unmistakable. I had seen enough crime scenes in my time to know violence when I saw it. I took pictures, scanning for anything that looked like a clue. Then I heard it. A creak from upstairs. I froze. The house was supposed to be empty. I crept up the stairs, heart hammering. The second floor was silent, but one of the doors, a bedroom, was cracked open. Inside, the walls were covered in yellowing newspaper clippings. Each one described murders that had taken place in the city over the past decade. And in the center of the room, a chair, covered in ropes and deep scratches, like someone had fought to escape. I snapped a few photos, then backed away. Something about this place felt wrong. Not just old crime scene wrong, like it had been waiting for me. I made my way out of the house, locking the door behind me. That's when I saw the car. A black sedan, parked down the street. Someone sitting inside, watching. I left fast, drove straight to the police department, told them what I found. The officer at the desk frowned. "That address?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Cara Delaney lived there. You guys processed a crime scene there, right? Years ago?" He tapped at his keyboard, searching. Then he shook his head. "No records of any crime at that house." "That's not possible." He turned the screen toward me. Nothing. No reports, no 911 calls, no murders. The blood, the tape, the scratched-up chair. It had never happened. I didn't sleep that night. I called Lisa, told her everything. She listened, quiet. Then she whispered, "I got a text from Cara today." I sat up fast. "What did it say?" She hesitated. Then, it just said, "Don't look for me." I never found her. Never figured out what happened in that house. But a few weeks later, I drove by again. The house was gone. Not torn down, not condemned. Just gone. Like it had never been there at all. And I never went looking again. The first thing the officers noticed was the smell. Not the usual decay or mildew that comes with a welfare check. Something worse. Something rotting. And yet, when they entered the apartment, everything was pristine. The floors were clean. The bed was made. And in the center of the room, a table, set for two. It was a simple setup. 2 plates, each with a carefully arranged meal. A bottle of red wine, half poured into 2 glasses. Candles burned low, wax pooled on the wood. But there was no one there, and no sign that anyone had eaten. The food sat untouched, congealed under dim light. It had been sitting there for days. The man they were looking for was named Ethan Brooks, mid-40s, lived alone, kept to himself. His neighbor had reported him missing after noticing his mailbox overflowing. The officers knocked. No answer. They got the landlord to open the door, and that's when they found the table. The rest of the apartment was empty. No struggle, no blood. Just that damn table, waiting for a dinner that never happened. And on it, right beside the wine bottle, Ethan's phone. Screen cracked, battery nearly dead. A single video, paused. The officers hit play. The footage was grainy, just Ethan sitting at that table, smiling. A candle flickered, casting shadows on his face. He raised his glass, nodded toward the empty seat across from him, like he was toasting someone. Then, a knock at the door. Ethan turned. The video ended. The timestamp was 3 weeks old, the last time anyone had seen him. And the front door? Still locked from the inside? No forced entry, no exit, just a missing man, and a dinner that was never touched. They pulled security footage from the hallway cameras. The last recording showed Ethan entering his apartment alone. No visitors, no one ever leaving. Forensics went over everything. The food on the plates was perfectly preserved, except for one small, strange detail. There were bite marks in the steak, human bite marks. The plate across from Ethan's chair had them. His own plate was untouched. The search for Ethan continued. No bank activity, no phone calls, no signs he was still alive. Eventually, the case went cold. The apartment was cleared out, rented to someone new. But Ethan's old neighbor swears, late at night when everything is quiet, she can still hear it. A knock, from inside the empty apartment. And sometimes, when she passes by the door, she swears she smells candle wax and red wine. Some crime scenes stick with you. It doesn't matter how many years pass, how many cases pile on top of it. Some things you just can't forget. In this case, I wish I could. It started with a home invasion. A woman named Sarah Calloway, 27 years old, called 911 in the middle of the night. The recording was chilling. "Please, someone's inside my house," she was whispering, trying to stay quiet. "I heard the back door open, but I don't see anyone." There was a rustling noise, then a soft thud. Then her voice, sharp with fear. "Oh my God!" Then silence. The call cut out. By the time officers arrived, it was too late. Sarah was dead in her bedroom, stabbed, no signs of forced entry. The only real evidence was the 911 call. I was assigned the case as lead investigator. At first, it seemed like a standard break-in gone wrong. But the more I listened to that call, the more something felt off. Like there was something else there, something we weren't hearing. I had the audio sent for enhancement. Specialists cleaned it up, isolating background noise. That's when we noticed it. A voice. Not Sarah's, something else. It came in the last 2 seconds, just before the line went dead. Faint, distant, a whisper. "We're not done yet." My blood went cold. This wasn't just a break-in. Whoever killed Sarah, they weren't finished. I sent officers back to her house, hoping we missed something. Maybe another fingerprint, maybe a hidden camera, anything. But the house was undisturbed, until we checked the voicemail. Sarah's phone was still plugged in beside her bed. There was one new message, left after she died. I pressed play, static. Then the whisper again, clearer this time. "We're not done yet." The timestamp? 3:33 a.m. Sarah was already dead by then. We traced the number. It came from her own phone. No outgoing call logs, no signs of tampering. Just the message. From her number. after she died. The case remains unsolved. No suspects, no leads. But I know one thing. Sarah wasn't the last. Because 2 months later, we got another 911 call. A different woman, same whispers. Same timestamp, same words. We're not done yet. It was just past midnight when the call came in. 911, what's your emergency? The woman on the other end was panicked, breathless. Oh my God, he just killed him. I straightened in my chair, already signaling to my partner to trace the call. Ma'am, where are you? He's in the alley. Right behind my apartment. He just ran. He's wearing a dark hoodie, jeans. Please, he just stabbed that man. He's not moving. Her voice shook, the kind of fear you don't fake. I typed the details into the system, dispatching units. Nearest patrol was 3 minutes out. Stay on the line with me, okay? Are you safe? I think so, but... She lowered her voice. The guy just ran toward Pine Street. Please tell me you're sending someone. They're almost there. Stay where you are. I heard her breathing, fast, uneven. Then, the sound of distant sirens. I see them. They're pulling up. A pause. Then, wait. What the hell? Ma'am? What's happening? The body, she gasped. It's gone. The officers arrived within moments. I stayed on the line, listening as they swept the alley. No blood, no body, no sign of a struggle, just an empty street. Ma'am, one of the officers said, voice calm but firm. Are you sure you saw someone? Yes, he was lying right there. I saw the knife. I saw... Her voice cut off. Then the line went dead. I tried calling her back. No answer. I checked the call logs. Unknown number. That wasn't unusual. Plenty of people had unlisted IDs. But something felt off. I checked our system for past reports from her number. Nothing. So I tried running it through an old database. And that's when I found it. Her number hadn't been active in years. It belonged to a deceased account holder, a woman who had died 5 years ago. I called the officers back, my hands cold. Did you find the witness? Negative, one of them said. We checked the apartment she called from, Unit 304, right? No one's lived there in months. Place is empty. That can't be right. We even checked security cameras facing the alley, the cop continued. No murder, no suspect, no witness. I didn't respond, because I was already looking at the call transcript, at the final words the woman had spoken before the line cut. Not just her words. There was something else. A faint whisper. Right before the call disconnected, it said one thing. It's happening again.